Welcome to day 32 of reading every single day for the rest of my life for 30 minutes. I'm so excited. We are at the top of page 49. I got 30 minutes right here. And starting in 3, 2, 1, start. Here we go. Let's get it. Welcome to day 32. I'm a little sick. Caves were not just places of safety for ancient humans, they were also their interface with their gods in the universe. Their walls were the edges of another existence. Caves were also a representation of the female reproductive tract and their tight entrances and mysterious internal chambers. The cloudy water dripping on the walls was associated with fertility. Caves were caves were ancient planetaria, observatories from which to explore the growing universe of our minds. Look at the famous caves of Laxcox. On the walls, a shaman has represented himself as a birdman, acquiring head and claws and stretching his arms like wings to indicate a transformation depicted as ethyopalic, because he produces the life-giving substance of the Milky Way, thus helping to protect and renew cosmic fertility. Much later, the ancient Greeks saw the Milky Way as a milk spilled from the breast of the goddess Hera. The desire was not to come into contact with some primeval power, but something alien in the prototypes of all creatures. It drove shaman to the power caves, a term used by the people of southern central California. Their belief was that the inner forces of nature and the creatures of the other world existed in caves. They wanted to contact these alien intelligences, these totem ancestors, and read the minds of the maps of the world, which they thought were written on the walls. They considered the depths of the cave to be at the very center, heart and origin of the world, the womb of the universe. We have always wanted to believe in aliens. We have worked out many things on the walls of these caves. Anyone who has been faced by their spectacular beauty could be forgiven, but not noticing many small symbols and signs scattered among the drawings of horses and bison. Of late, they have garnered some attention along with the thinking they may be significant. Strangely, some 26 signs have been found in caves over a wide geographical area in southern Europe, originating from 35,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is coincident with the arrival of modern humans. Straight lines, circles, triangles, wavy lines, and more complex signs could be telling us something we have overlooked. Perhaps they marked a dawning realization that things can be represented symbolically as well as literal drawings of animals, that symbols might represent something of another world yet connected to ours. 18 of the symbols have been detected in Australia from 40,000 years ago, which perhaps points to a creative explosion that took place independently in various parts of the world. These symbols were parts of a process that enabled people to share information beyond an individual's lifespan. Special symbols revered and sacred, telling people stories about their short generations. We will probably never know what they might mean. Wonder if there are symbols passing down between the stars, and if we found them, would we ever be able to determine what they meant? Thus, the first cosmic connection was forged, and it has influenced the way we see the universe ever since. But we are still a species in transition. When our minds changed 50,000 years ago, we learned to face the universe and ask questions, solve its problems with the absence of emotions and using objectivity, combined with the linear thought and sustained attention spans. We made our consciousness, but how much of it is just human and how much of it is a universal component that we share with an alien we might find? How much do we share with the creature of our own planet? Is there a spectrum of consciousness? And if so, where are we in it? William James, the father of American psychology, said, "No account of the universe in its totality can be found which leaves these forms of consciousness quite disregarded." Perhaps the most interesting question concerns not how aliens evolved, but what their mentality, their consciousness is like. What realms of consciousness could be generated by other nervous systems? As to the mind of an alien, nobody knows anything, or perhaps we do. Perhaps we have to search ourselves as well as the stars for an answer. Hamlet argues with himself, not with the gods. In Plato's book, The Republic, he relates how Socrates described a book of people who lived their life chained to a blank wall. They watched shadows projected on the wall from the objects passing in front of the fire behind them, and they gave names to the shadows. To these shadows, the shadows are their reality, but the shadows are not the real thing. Would aliens be like the new corners to the Neanderthals in northern Western Europe, or like shadows of the wall in a cosmic cave? Speak to me. Alien contact could come in many guises, instantaneously or gradually. Perhaps it will be something so obviously artificial or inhuman that it immediately shows off itself to be mark of an alien intelligence, a signal or an artifact of some sort. Perhaps it will be dawning realization that something already in plain sight can be interpreted differently, revealing a previously unappreciated design or interference. However it comes about, in that moment of realization our conception of the universe would change. It is the thing that scientists, artists, and philosophers crave. One person in all of history would make that first contact. Life would have a new story to tell. New doors and possibilities would open to wonders and fears. All that happened before, that would be so crazy. Imagine it's so different. Like whatever is out there, imagine it's so like, God. This is so fascinating. All that happened before it would be part of a different universe, a sterile one, in which we are alone yet supreme. Afterwards, as far as our evolution goes, it would be year zero. As we shall see, we have been blinkered in the way we might discover aliens, as we have placed too much importance in one potential method of communication. The way most favored by scientists is that we would detect an artificial radio signal coming from space. Some are surprised we have not yet detected such a signal. Others are glad we haven't. On one occasion we thought we had detected such a message, we felt thrilled of first contact. In 1901, the eccentric genius Nikola Tesla believed he had received a message from aliens by way of newly discovered radio waves. As he put it, it was some time afterward when he thought flashed upon my mind that disturbances I had observed might be due to intelligence control. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another. Brethren, we have a message from another world, unknown and remote. It reads, 1, 2, 3. The following year, the distinguished British physicist Lord Kelvin was in the United States and announced that he believed Tesla and had detected Martians calling Earth. He said that New York was the most marvelously lighted city in the world and that it could be seen from Mars. Mars is signaling to New York, he said. 2 years before his purported alien signals, Tesla had set up a laboratory in Colorado Springs equipped with a 200-foot transmission tower and a high-voltage equipment to generate radio waves. He wanted to electrify the Earth so that anyone could place a conductor into the ground and tap our planet's electrical potential. Free energy for all was his wish, but Tesla was naive. Although he could master the strange powers of magnetism and electricity, the human forces of money and monopoly, greed and power were a mystery to him. One night during research, when he was alone among the things he did understand, his emotions coils and transforms. He observes electrical actions. The changes I noted were taking place periodically in such a clear suggestion of number and order that were not traceable to any that known to me. I was familiar, of course, with such electrical disturbances as produced by the sun, aurora borealis, and earth currents, and I was as sure as I could be of any fact that these variations was due to none of these causes. Later, the Richmond Times reported, as he sat beside his instrument on the hillside in Colorado, in the deep silence of that austere, inspiring region where you plant your feet in gold and your head brushes the constellation, as he sat there that one evening, alone, his attention exquisitely alive in that conjecture, was arrested by a faint sound from the receiver, 3 fairy taps, one after the other, at a fixed interval. What man has ever lived on this earth would not envy Tesla at that moment? The question of whether there is intelligent life in space reached a turning point during the last decade of the 19th century as advances in telescope technology allowed more detailed scrutiny of the planet Mars. One of the chief protagonists for life on Mars at the time was Bostonian astronomer Lucille Lowell. who later wrote that life awaits the wings of his existence for its cue to enter the scene that moment the stage is set, and the stage has been set. Giovanni Virginio Schiaparelli was the greatest observer of Mars in the 19th century during the favorable close approach in September 1877, when the planet was just 56 kilometers away. He produced a remarkable map. Others had been seen hazy patches and little details on the disk. But Schiaparelli saw more. He saw lines that called canali, the Italian words mean channels, and does not apply in an artificial origin, but others translated the terms as canals, and soon speculated what Rife was the dying planet whose inhabitants constructed giant canals to bring water from the polar caps to the equatorial deserts. Also watching Mars that year was Lowell, who'd become obsessed by the canals, a little too obsessed it turned out. When he heard that Schiaparelli had been forced to discontinue observing due to failing eyesight, he decided to build an observatory to study Mars. It seemed obvious to him and many others that Mars was another kind of Earth. The two planets had so much in common. Mars had an atmosphere and Earth-like markings on its surface, including what seemed to be polar ice caps. Its day was only 41 minutes longer than ours. That's crazy. It's so close, too. The 1892 opposition was the most favorable, since that of 1877, and Lowell's assistant Andrew Douglas traveled to Peru determined to see the canals. He drew even more spots at the intersection of canals as well as lakes. In 1893, the Irish astronomer and prolific popular lecturer Sir Robert Ball wrote that there may be types of life of some other kind or others on Mars is, I should think, very likely. Speculations have also been as to the possibility of there being intelligent inhabitants on this planet, and I do not see how anyone can deny the possibility at events of such a notion. At Lowell's new observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, Mars was observed almost every night between June and December 1994. Lowell had driven the construction of a new observatory on a high plateau in northern Arizona as he records speed. He and Douglas produced over 900 confirmings his belief that he was seeing a planet-wide irrigation network. Without seas and mountains, life would tend the quicker to reach a highly organized stage. Thus, Martian conditions make for intelligence, he wrote. The public were convinced there was life on Mars thanks to Lowell's popular book Mars, released in 1895. In his 1897 novel On Two Planets, Kurd Laßwitz imagined the Martians would help humans reach a higher state. H.G. Wells, on the other hand, in his 1998 novel, The War of the Worlds, I was part of a play with that book, War of the Worlds foresaw conflict and disaster. This division of opinion about the outcome of extraterrestrial contact has continued. But by the time of the next Mars approach, others cannot confirm Lowell's findings. Alfred Russel Wallace wrote, Mars, therefore, is not only uninhabited by intelligent beings, as Mr. Lowell postulates, it is absolutely uninhabitable. Likewise, Tesla alien signals captured media attention but did not impress scientists, despite the fact that he was not alone in making such claims. Another pioneer of radio, Guglielmo Marconi, also said that he had contacted Martians. Thomas Edison later saw that Marconi's work had been grounds for the theory of inhabitants, and other planets are trying to signal us. Tesla welcomed contact with aliens, faint and uncertain. They had given me a deep conviction and foreknowledge that ere long humans belong on the globe, as one will return their eyes at the firmament above, with feelings of love and reverence, thrilled by the glad news. In 1901, Marconi and his radio waves had spanned the Atlantic, and a revolution in communications was underway. So when the First World War arrived, transatlantic radio signaling was routine. In 1920, Marconi said his stations on both sides of the Atlantic had been detecting strange signals since before the war. Some were in what sounded like a code but were meaningless as far as he could tell. When asked by a reporter if these might be another part of the planet, Marconi said, adding, "If there are any human beings on Mars, I would not be surprised if they should find a means of communications with this planet." On 2nd September 1921, the New York Times reported that Marconi was certain the signals came from Mars. Tesla was unimpressed in Marconi's assessment, saying that they could be undertones of man-made signals, like harmonics of a musical note. It all added to the excitement of the time. There was to be another close opposition of Mars in 1924, and by the time we had radio waves, it was the best chance of humankind ever had to contact Martians. Get a sip of water. Nice and cold. In the 17th century, Voltaire called Bernard Le Bois de Fontenelle the most universal genius that the age of Louis the Bois has produced. Fontenelle helped write an opera at the age of 20 and later became official historian of the French Academy of Sciences. The work that brought his fame throughout Europe was called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, published in the 1686 as a series of discussions with fictitious Martians. He maintained that the worlds of our solar system were inhabited. Those who lived on Mercury, the nearest planet on the sun, are also so full of fire that they are absolutely mad. I fancy they have any memory at all, he stated. He wrote that the residents of Saturn, at most of the known planets, live very miserably. The sun seems to have a little pale star, whose light and heat can be very weak in a great distance. He also said that visitors from another world traveled by comet. You know it is very well. You know all is very well, the Marciones replied, without knowing it is so, which is a great deal of ignorance, founded upon a very little knowledge. Even in the Enlightenment, such ideas were still dangerous. It was, after all, less than a century since Giordano Bruno had died at the stake for heresy. Swedish theologian and mystic Emanuel Swedenborn had somewhat different view. In a series of dreams he had regarded as divine revelations, he said he was visited by spirits from other planets who told him of countless inhabited worlds and that there were two races living on Venus, one gentle and humane, the other savage and cruel. Those inhabitants Mars and residents of the solar system, resembling the early Christians in their piety. On 25th August 1835, there was an article of the Daily New York Sun with the headline, "Great Astronomical Discoveries, Lately Made by Sir John Herschel at the Cape of Good Hope." It was written by Richard Adams Locke. The newspaper reported that the English astronomer had, by using a 7,000 kilogram telescope lens with a magnification of 72,000, been able to observe rocks, trees, flowers, and even intelligent wings being of float sexes on the moon. New York went into a frenzy at the news. After having only read at one installment, Locke could hardly believe his luck, building on the excitement. He already had The Sun, an exclusive series on reports about Herschel's latest discoveries. Excited readers certainly got their money's worth with accounts about one spectacular lunar discovery into another. The second installment revealed that the moon was covered with crimson flowers, precisely similar, remarked Herschel's assistant, Dr. Grant, to the paper Reyes, as a rose peppy of our sublunary cornfield. Poppies were not all that the moon had to offer. Indeed, there was an entire lunar forest. The trees, said Dr. Grant for a period of 10 minutes, were one of the most unvaried kind, and unlike any I have seen, except the largest class of yews in the English churchyards, which they in some respectable resemble. The observers also saw a green plain on which some kind of fir tree grew, and then a lake of marine blue water in the next valley. Herschel and Grant saw groups of crystals. An amethyst rose from the ground in the shape of obelisks and pyramids. In the distance were herds of bison, and their shaggy pelts covering their faces to protect their eyes from the extremes of light and the darkness of the moon. Then blue goat-like creatures appeared. The second article in the Sun ended with the description of a unicorn that landed in the moon. New Yorkers loved it. The circulation of the Sun climbed from 8,000 to 19,360. It had become the newspaper with the world's largest circulation overnight. Even the Times of London had circulation of only 17,000, and Richard Adams' Locke had barely begun. The next article reported on the discovery of intelligent life. We are thrilled with astonishment to perceive 4 successive flocks of large winged creatures descend with a slow, even motion from the cliffs on the western side, and alight upon the plain. We counted 3 parties of these creatures walking erect towards a small wood near the base of the eastern precipice. Certainly they were human-like beings, for their wings had now disappeared, and their attitude in walking was both erect and dignified. These creatures were evidently engaged in conversation. Their gesticulation, and particularly in varied action, the varied action of their hands and arms appeared impassionate and emphatic. We hence inferred that they were rational beings. Locke told them on the Temple of the Moon, constructed of the sapphire, with a roof of yellow resembling gold. There were pillars 21 meters high and 1.8 meters thick. More man-bats were seen walking through its precincts. But now even Locke could not continue his fantasy. Readers of the Sun, who were eagerly awaiting more astoundingly detail, were told that the telescope had, unfortunately, been left facing the east, and sun's rays, concentrated through the lenses, burned a hole 15 feet in circumference through the reflecting chamber, putting the observatory out of commission. Later, Edgar Allan Poe explained that he stopped work after the second part of the unparalleled adventure of one Hans Pitfall because he felt he had been outdone. In one Harriet Montagu of Springfield, Massachusetts, Missionary Society resolved to send missionaries to the moon to convert and civilize the Batmen. Then the Journal of Commerce, another New York paper, wanted to reprint the entire story. At first, Locke tried to dissuade the editors from running it. It was yesterday's news, he argued. They persisted, and eventually Locke was forced to tell the truth. The Journal of Commerce got its scoop by announcing that the whole story had been a fabrication, from beginning to end. For a while, many believed there was intelligent life on the moon, and it was met with fascination, not panic. But how do we signal across the gulf of space? If there are bat or men or Martians, how do we let them know we are here? The mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss proposed that forests be modified in Siberia to make a gigantic right-angled triangle that could be seen from Mars. In Vienna, the astronomer Joseph John von Littrow had a similar notion that canals be dug in the Sahara, forming a geometric shape. In France, Charles Cross wanted to build a vast mirror to reflect sunlight toward Mars. A similar idea was suggested by Sperry Gyroscope Company after the First World War, in which he would use its high-powered searchlights to direct a beam towards Mars. The close opposition of Mars in 1924 approached. In anticipation, David Todd, who had been head of astronomy department of Amherst College in Massachusetts, proposed all radio stations on Earth be shut down to listen for signals. On 21st August 1924, the Chief of Naval Operations of the U.S. Navy sent a message to the most powerful stations under his command, from Cavite to the Philippines to Alaska, from the Canal Zone to Puerto Rico, telling them to avoid unnecessary transmissions and to listen for unusual signals. A similar order we sent to Army stations. Charles Francis Jenkins was waiting with his radio receiver. As a 29-year-old, he may have been aware of 1896 newspaper article entitled "A Signal from Mars," which reported a luminous projection of the southern edge of the planet, suggesting the inhabitants of Mars were flashing messages to Earth. We can find the same idea of space in music. A few years later, someone composed a signal from Mars. March in two-step. Jenkins was one of the pioneers of television, had held over 400 patients in the fledgling technology in 1928. He established the first TV broadcasting station in the United States, W3XK, but his first system relied on mechanical devices that were soon superseded by electronical components, consigning him to be one of television's less known developers. Although his TV system did not communicate with many on Earth, he did try to establish communication with intelligent life on Mars. In 1918, he built a radio receiver, the extraordinary SE-950, which can still be seen in some museums. It was designed to be a rugged field radio for the U.S. Navy in the First World War, as it could be used to locate enemy radios. It was a magnificent piece of work for its time, when its rondo sharing and glowing valves and its ball-like dials and knobs. It had some unique features, such as different knob styles for different sensitivities, as well as numerous external terminals for connecting to other devices. After the war, its versatility allowed it to remain useful in Jenkins' laboratory. Between 21st and 23rd August 1924, Mars came closer to Earth than any time in the century before or the next 80 years. In the United States, it was the National Radio Silence Day, when for the 36 hours all radios went quiet for 5 minutes on the hour. At the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, a radio receiver was lifted 3 kilometers above the ground on a balloon. William F. Friedman, the chief cryptographer of the U.S. Army, was aligned to translate any potential Martian message picked up by the Jenkins SE-950, which was connected to a device capable of photographically recording any alien communication. Nothing was heard from Mars, but something had shifted. The technology of radio communication and its possibilities set in motion a train of technological developments that changed the way we looked at the universe. Get some water. Radio astronomy came about by accident. Carl G. Jansky of the Bell Telephone Laboratories was trying to track down the source of interference of the company's transatlantic radio communications. In 1931, at Halmdale in New Jersey, he built an antenna array on a wooden frame that was 100 feet long, which rode on 4 wheels taken from a Ford Model T. He called it his merry-go-round and rotated every 20 minutes. He found 3 types of interference. One came from lightning and nearby thunderstorms. The second from more distant storms, but the other form was different. He put it on a loudspeaker and noticed it slowly changed in intensity during the day, noting that it moved almost completely around the compass in 24 hours. In January, he said its direction coincided with that of the sun, but in a few months later it was coming from a different direction. He then realized that it remained fixed among the stars. One time there seemed to be a jump in his record when he realized that he had forgotten to allow the daylight saving time. He announced his discovery at a meeting of the American section of the International Scientific Radio Union on 27th April 1933. The radio emissions, he said, appeared to be coming from beyond the solar system. They might be from a single source or from a great many sources scattered throughout the heavens, he explained. Jansky's reports of signals from beyond the solar system was front-page news. Although he discounted the possibility that there were of alien origin, most astronomers were unimpressed. It was left to amateur astronomer Grote Reber to take the next step. Reber was a radio engineer and built a parabolic antenna in his backyard at Wheaton, a Chicago suburb. It was the first dish that was turned on in the heavens, and his results was published in 1940 showed almost the entire Milky Way to be a source of radio noise, with several regions of more intense emission. In the Second World War, the Germans had been trying to defeat the British warning system by flooding its radio receivers with signals. It was noticed by the British that the direction of the jamming point of the sun, as well as the continent. This was a military secret. Wait, what? It was noticed by the British that the direction of the jamming pointed to the sun as well as the continent. This was a military secret. In 1944, news of Weber's work reached the German-occupied Netherlands, and the astronomers of the Leiden Observatory. Jan H. Oort, director of the observatory, held a seminar of the implications of Weber's observations. An entirely new window had been opened on the heavens. Oort said, until then, all of our knowledge of the universe, apart from meteorites or cosmic ray particles, had been acquired through observation of that narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum called visible light. Oort knew a revolution was coming, but there was a problem. Unlike light, the radio spectrum seemed to lack the brighter lines that were so useful to optical astronomy. My hair's kind of wacky, guys. My bad. Looks like 30 minutes is up. We're at the middle of page 65. And yeah, that was day 32. See you guys day 33.